Hello everyone and welcome. I'm the Average Joe and this video is about America, the once great nation. Many people believe this country is headed in the wrong direction, and I tend to agree, for many different reasons. Today we'll talk about politics and the reasons why politics has changed over the years. Politics has become very partisan in recent decades, and I see it not changing anytime soon. Presidents issue their executive orders and then on a whim rather than follow old traditions and previous administrations. Write a bill and then try and pass that bill. That was the way it was done. When I was growing up, to my knowledge, we only had Democrats and Republicans and communists. No one ever mentioned independence. Now, I'm aware we've had independence, but now we have people who are left of center, right of center, and outside of knowing my left from my right hand, I'm not sure what that means. Of course, we know politics is made up of conservatives and progressives, liberals and radicals. Plus, with the addition of the MAGA Republicans, we now must cater to a half a dozen groups who all want different things from our government, with some overlap, of course. Many people have talked about how we've fallen on hard times and what our government is doing to fix those things. Right now, if we look back in recent history, or at least 100 years ago, we have a quote from a book by Harvey Robinson from 100 years ago. Our present notions of nationality are very recent origin, going back scarcely 100 years. Formerly, nations were made up of this subject or that subject, and that of our gracious majesty we were regarded as God-given beasts of burden, or slaves, or in more amiable moods as children. Mind in the Making, Harvey Robinson, 1921. So we were thought up as subjects and slaves and people who were basically thought of to be children, as our rulers deemed. That has changed, and we now have a system where we may be able to vote and vote in and out our leaders. Politicians have basically sold us down the river, selling the people to Wall Street, big oil, and big pharma. We must ask, what is the end game of our politicians? This hamster wheel we keep spinning on just keeps spinning along with no end in sight. So what is the end game of our politicians? Congress tries to placate us by calling up their witch hunts during economic downturns. Aimed at the big oil, big banks, big pharma, hoping to convince us they are acting in our best interest, all the while taking money from all three of these entities. Politicians used to deliver on their promises, or at least some of them. Now it's just lip service. New politicians promise they will make changes to the swamp, but they in the end up being swallowed by all the other swamp creatures, becoming one of the many swamp monsters themselves. Words like communism or socialism were used as derogatory terms years ago when I was growing up, not badges of honor for politicians today. These men and women seem to follow the prevailing wind and fail to vote their conscience or what the people have instructed them to do. These politicians only seem to be worried about the next election and not what you and I want. Due to technology, we get to see how the sausage is made on a daily basis, and it's not pretty. Many years ago, Senator Charles Bishop made news when he was slapped Senator Lowell Barron while on the Senate floor. Senator Bishop had to be restrained and later walked out of the Senate room. This is what you would expect from the Jerry Springer show, not from our politicians. So, when we see politicians being polled by the people, the voters have a low opinion of politicians, right around used car salesmen. Both parties believe they're in the right. No chance for compromise by either side. Therefore, very little gets done in Washington today to benefit the voters and the taxpayers. We look at the debt clock and we are astonished it's this high today. Each citizen is liable for hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt or more. Sad, since most people in this country can't afford a $400 emergency. How can they pay off this kind of debt to the government, a government that seems to be out of control? Here's a quote from a president, a founding father, I should say, a long time ago. I am not among those who fear the people. They, and not the rich, are our dependents for continued freedom. And to preserve their independence, we must not let our rulers load us up with perpetual debt. That person was Thomas Jefferson. So he knew then where we were heading a long time ago. Now, when we talk about politics today, there are three things we must remember, and I call it the 3 Ps. The most important thing to remember was there was a relationship between the people, the press, and the politicians. If the politicians failed, the press took notice and warned the people. But when the press fails and is in the pocket of the political party or a political party, the people are in trouble. Who are we to believe? So if we go back and we listen to a quote that I have here, excuse me for one moment. So here's the quote. The sovereignty of the people, universal suffrage, and the liberty of the press are all the same thing under 3 different names. The 3 together constitute the whole of our public right. The first is its principle, the second its manner, and the third its expression. The 3 principles are dissoluble from one another. The sovereignty of the people is the life-giving soul of the nation. Universal suffrage its government, the press its illumination, but they are all really one, and that unity is the republic. It is curious to notice how these principles appear again in the watchword of the republic. For the sovereignty of the people creates liberty, universal suffrage creates equality, and the press, which enlightens the general mind, creates fraternity. Wherever these 3 great principles exist in their powers and plenitude, there is the republic, even though it be known as a monarchy. Wherever, on the other hand, they are betrayed, hindered, or oppressed, the actual state is a monarchy or oligarchy, even though it goes under the same name as the republic. In the latter case, we see the monstrous phenomenon of a government betrayed by its proper guardians, and it's the phenomenon that makes the stoutest hearts begin to be doubtful of revolutions. Let us never forget that our 3 first principles live with a common life and mutually defend one another. If the liberty of the press is in danger, the suffrages of the people arise and protect it. And again, if the franchise is threatened, it is safeguarded by the freedom of the press. Any attempt against either of them is treachery to the sovereignty of the people. The Lives and Letters, Volume 10, by Victor Hugo, 1875. So this was thought of by many people years ago. Now, when we talk about politicians today, we go by slogans that seem to never win an election, but we do them anyway. I hope they don't win an election. There's the chicken in every pot, 2 cars in every garage. The buck stops here, and don't forget, make America great again. Political buttons and slogans should never win elections. Now, as we see in schools, they are supposed to make us good citizens, to help us make those decisions, to put in a good government to run our political system. Now, according to James Carville, a Democratic operative, the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans is stark. Democrats believe all hands on deck, while the Republicans believe in every man for himself. What Carville fails to understand is that's who America was 100 years ago or more. Carville fails to realize both sayings made up who we were as a nation. Since this may turn out to be a close election, leaning towards politicians want maybe 16-year-olds in the future to vote in our elections. Of course, I was 16. I was buying comic books and model kits. I wasn't ready to vote. Now, again, I realize kids today are more sophisticated than we were in my time. We didn't have iPhones, iPads, and iWatches. But a 16-year-old mind may not be ready to make those voting decisions. And I hope we would think about that before we try passing laws. Now, when we're speaking of politics, basically another quote is, when we have 2 goats meet on a narrow bridge over deep waters, How do they behave? Neither of them can turn back again, and neither can pass because the bridge is too narrow. If they should trust one another, they would basically, one would lay down and the other would cross over the other. This way, no one would fall and drown. And that's what our politicians do not do today. They will not work together. And we must try to change that. Now, neither party has done much for this country in the last 60 years. They've bickered and fought, and we've seen that on a daily basis. So what we're going to try and do is let's talk about the lighter side of politics. One of my favorite groups growing up was the Three Stooges. And in one of their 20-minute shorts, Mo Howard is practicing a political speech. And I'm going to give you his words from that speech. In these sordid and morbid times when our national economy is at stake, and steak is $3 a pound, there is a crying need for a man of destiny to step forth. What our country needs is tax reform and land reform. Instead, all we get is chloroform. Shall we remain asleep? Washington freed the country, Lincoln freed the slaves, and our candidate will free the working man from work. So what we have here is a half a century ago, Mo Howard, his words still ring true today. The housing markets are a mess, the country offers low-paying jobs, and the banking system is still suspect. And of course, who wants to work today? People want to be paid whether they work or not. We have learned that President Biden will not run in the 2024 election, and he's doing the right thing for the country. In my life, I've dealt with elderly people. My mother was in a nursing home in her mid-80s, but before that, several years before she went into the nursing home, she started to lose her memory, and she was making certain decisions that she shouldn't make. And I got to realize that, this is what happens when we all get older, and it's going to happen to everyone. The fact that the media tried to fool us on this as if we did not have parents, especially older citizens, excuse me, like myself, we could see that. We could see those things. And the fact that the press tried to hide these things tells us we cannot trust them. Now, when we saw this, instead of giving us the true story, they held things from us. And right now, Biden is the poster child for term limits. We should be looking at mandatory term limits for all politicians at a certain age. Now, experts can debate on that, whether it's 75, whether it's 76, whether it's 77. That's not the point. What should be the point is these people should be taking cognitive tests every couple of years so we know where we stand. Now, I know that a lot of people don't like Trump, and that's fine. I wasn't crazy about Trump when he came out, and I can understand. And I think a little cartoon might help us understand what Trump is all about. So here we have the media saying, Dr. Frankenstein, what have you done? And of course, Dr. Frankenstein says, I didn't make him, you did. This was the media that made Trump. They fawned over Trump. Trump was their guy. He gave them ratings. So therefore, Trump was a hero to them, of course, until he won. Once he won the election, they were appalled. So this is what happened to the media. They made him, and now they want to destroy him. That's very interesting. Now, as we were saying before about politics, due to the technology, we get to see how the sausage is made. And therefore, we've seen how these people act, and we have to do something about it. Now, maybe the next election is what we can do. But since we're here, we're going to talk about why we're discussing politics in the first place. And I would think that after watching this, we understand why. So if you're a Republican or a Democrat, you certainly were a small child, then a teenager, and then you became an adult. And it was time for you to be indoctrinated. And that's what we've seen through our school systems. And it's a shame, but that's the way things are. Colleges have turned our children into something we don't recognize. And they've been breeding grounds for leftist propaganda. So it's interesting that we have to deal with that now. When I was a child, we didn't have that. We were taught math, science, history, all the things. Now we're taught political science, which was not the way things used to work in my day. And if we go back and we look at what we had here in the debate, was the 2024 debate, and we have Trump saying, what did he say before he dozed off? This was our president basically dozing off. They say Biden has a photographic memory. Yeah, but his pictures are from the 60s. So this was a major issue, and this is what turned this whole election cycle around today, is the fact that he could not perform even without an audience and just with a couple of moderators, which is a shame, but this is what our press has done to us in politics today. They are basically leaning to one, and I'm not giving Fox any pass here. They do the same. But we have to understand that, these things should change over time, hopefully. And if we go to our last cartoon of the day, for those who like artwork, right here is what we have in politics today about wrong thinking and right thinking. Some people today are being canceled because they are wrong thinking. They're being doxxed because they're wrong thinking, and that's not the way things should be. We have the right to speak freely. That's in our amendments in the Constitution, the First Amendment. And when we see that, who knew back in 1966 a writer for Star Trek would have it right? He had it right all along. And his lines in the series, in this episode, was wrong thinking will be punished. Right thinking will be rewarded. And who knew? He knew. That writer knew. Because today people are being punished for wrong thinking. And unfortunately, I'm not sure who's in charge of right thinking. So here we are with our last art board of the day, giving us a clear indication that writers in Hollywood knew back in the mid-60s what was going to happen if this continued. So there we are with a little bit of our insight into politics today. We are worried about where things are going in this country, the economy, infrastructure, employment. All these things are weighing heavily on the citizens of the United States. And of course, there are other things we can get into, and we will in the future, about politics. But this was our first foray into delving into what is happening in this country, what can be done, hopefully, to ameliorate things. And we hope we can get back on the right track. And I'm hoping that we can do that someday in the near future. Be with us again sometime.